propaganda rebel group, the Lord's Resistance Army, Dominic Ongwen, was on Thursday convicted by the International Criminal Court. While these may appear to be some good news, considering the multiple crimes committed by Ongwen, there are concerns that Africa has become a target of the court by some means, and many democratically elected leaders have been indicted by the court. The ICC, established to dispense justice to victims of war, crimes, and human rights abuses, has, according to its critics, been unable to extricate itself from the allegation that the court was essentially set up to hound, investigate, and prosecute leaders in Africa. In 2008, Rwandan President Paul Kagame dismissed the court, stating that it was created to prosecute Africans and others from poor countries. In 2012, the African Union instituted a policy of non-cooperation against the arrest warrant on then President of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir. Burundi, South Africa, Gambia, they both moved to exit the international court, accusing the court of undermining their sovereignty and unfairly targeting Africans. The prosecution of the court, the prosecutor of the court, Fatou Bensouda, who is the first African to occupy the top job, was sanctioned by the United States over attempts to investigate the actions of American troops in Afghanistan. Although the election of a new ICC prosecutor is scheduled for the second resumption of the 19th session of the Assembly of States, state parties on the 8th of February 2021. To what extent has the International Criminal Court been able to dispassionately discharge its mandate? Is the court independent, considering the growing concerns of overbearing focus on Africa? What are the major orders before the ICC in ensuring fairness among countries and state parties? What is the implication of the United States sanction on the outgoing prosecutor of the ICC over the probe into alleged war crimes by American soldiers? These are the issues before us today, and as the ICC plans to elect a new prosecutor. Joining us to speak to this issue is Benga Adoton. Benga is an associate professor of international commercial law and the deputy director of studies at Kent Law School, University of Kent in England. There he is, and he's joining us from Kent in England. We are also being joined by Afam Osigwe. Afam is a senior advocate of Nigeria. Here he is. Thank you. Thank you guys for taking your time to join us on the program today. But before I go to my guests, let's quickly take a short break as we take a look at most people that have been convicted by the International Criminal Court, and thereafter I'll bring in my guests. Don't go away. It's going to be a good time. All right, welcome back. You are also watching Global Matters, coming to you live here on AIT. And I have my guest joining us from Kent in England, Dr. Benga Odunto, an associate professor, and also Afam Osigwe, a senior advocate of Nigeria. Thank you guys for taking your time to join us on the program today. Let me quickly turn to Benga. Benga, thank you for taking your time to join us. Quickly, Benga, tell us, to what extent has the International Criminal Court, in your view, been able to dispassionately discharge its mandate? Benga.
Thank you very much, Tunde, for having me on your program. Always a pleasure for me.
Yeah.
The ICC, by its institutive instruments that brought it into existence came to do a very important job in the international system, which is to offer a better protection for the international rule of law by making sure that when there's a systemic problem, there's a systematic abuse of human rights in terms of crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression, the international system is not left powerless. It's one of the reasons why I'm very proud of this discipline called international law, that states, human beings, governments can come together for such a laudable, purpose to make sure that where the national systems are weak or unwilling or unable to prosecute criminals, war criminals, the international system is not left powerless. So it's a beautiful idea. It's an idea that is working. If it didn't exist, we would have to create it. It solves a lot of problems for us. It investigates and prosecutes crimes committed within member states. It's limited in certain respects. For instance, it can only deal with issues submitted or within the existence of its member states. It deals only with crimes of nationals and member states, as I said, or any issue referred to it by the United Nations. It has this principle of complementarity. It's working relatively well in theory.
working relatively well in theory. That's a very appears to be a good submission in theory. But what about in practice? Let me go to Sigwe, senior advocate of Nigeria. I mean, if you listen to what Dr. Gbenga says, this is working relatively well in theory. That sounds very, very, very. That sounds very, very good. Let me ask you this. In your view, do you think African leaders are right that the ICC has put too much pressure on African leaders? And considering people that have been jailed or have been convicted, there are more of people from Africa, the third world, none of them from either America that has insisted no American citizen will ever be prosecuted by the ICC, not any from the United Kingdom, France, but only Africa and the third world. Do you think in practice, indeed, ICC has justified its existence? Also get to you, sir. Yes.
To me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, let me say this. At the initial stage, African leaders, and indeed many Africans, criticize the ICC as being like interested in Africa. But interestingly, that would appear to have changed a little bit. A number of the cases taken to the ICC were taken by some of these African governments or by civil society organizations in Africa. It may also be said that a number of the atrocities actually are alleged to take place in Africa. So where you have a disproportionate incidents occurring in a particular part of the world, maybe as a result of bad governance, dictatorship, and wanton disregard for the rule of law, there's every tendency that cases are more likely to come from that part of the world. But the ICC has largely not lived up to its billing. It is expected by now ICC would have been established as would have been able to move at a faster pace in investigating matters and bringing them to trials. But it has also made some progress in some regards, has established the fact that atrocities which are committed within national boundaries, which national governments may be unwilling to prosecute or investigate, would actually have an opportunity of being investigated by an independent international body. So where a national government is culpable or is trying to shield those who are responsible for allegations of crimes against humanity or the like, then those who are affected by it would have recourse to a court like the ICC to be able to investigate and bring those persons to sanction. And where such persons refuse, where those whom governments refuse to cooperate by handing over such individuals, certain steps could also be taken to ensure that those persons appear for their trial before the International Criminal Court. So largely the ICC may not have been the success it was expected to be, but it has also is not also a total failure. And I guess I should stop so far.
Not a failure in all. Gbenga, let me come to you. I mean, if you look at the role the big powers in the world have actually played in international politics, Gbenga, do I say I have you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Say, for instance, the US say no American citizens will ever be prosecuted by the ICC. This is a big player. There are human rights violations being committed by American soldiers in Afghanistan where they fought. Not any in England, by UK, no UK citizen prosecuted. And that is where we have the concerns that, look, the big players are pushing Africa towards the precipice, and they are saying they make it look as if Africa is the devil of the world that must be punished at all costs.
You raise a very important point, and this is where I put on my critic hat again. I have always been one of the strongest critics of American hegemony that I know of all my contemporaries in this field of international law, certainly from Nigeria. I will not cease to take the opportunity to tear down all aspects of international relations that are based on sheer power and political influence. Having said that, yes, you are very correct. Nearly every area of international law shows the footprints and the fingerprints of abuse of power by the hegemonic powers, like the United States, like the UK, like France, and certain members of the European Union. These countries disregard international law when it comes to areas where it tries to limit their excesses and their powers. For instance, on several occasions, right in front of all of us, the US abused the laws of war. You remember how it started doing rendition, the rendition program, where people were basically kidnapped from roads and streets and corners across the world and sent across the world in chartered flights to go and receive torture in Algeria, in regimes. We all know that the Guantanamo Bay is still on. People have been kept in detention since the early part of the century, the turn of the century. In 2003, 2004, 2005, Guantanamo Bay is still open till today. Guantanamo Bay is an open wound in the conscience of the world. And it's an issue that nobody's raising. You don't hear it on CNN, you don't hear it on BBC. Those are the normal areas. They capture the high ground, and the discussion does not even happen. That's just rendition. How about the sheer use of torture that we saw and witnessed in Abu Ghraib? Whoever brought that up before an international tribunal? There was these pictures, you can still Google them up, of a U.S. Army woman, sergeant, who used a rope and was dragging an Iraqi man on the floor. We saw naked Iraqi men being tortured with dogs near their private parts. We didn't get any apologies. There has not been any international raising of this issue. So when it comes to the sheer use of power and disregard of international law, very surprisingly and very disappointingly, the major powers of the world are at the forefront of abuse. And talking particularly about the ICC, between 2004 and 2016, all the cases, situations under investigations were relating to Africa, apart from one, which was Georgia. Of the other 12 situations that have been that went through preliminary investigations by the ICC, 5 other African states were investigated. So there's no doubt the facts speak for themselves. The fact is that Africa is about the only continent that is represented at the ICC. I am not for one moment suggesting that Africans should not be brought before the ICC. As my learned senior brother Afamusigwe did say here, if you have a problem with the rule of law leading to wars in your continent, you will have more instances. But how about those blatant African countries put together have not fought the number of wars that the United States has fought in the last 20 years? The US has strategically kept out of the ICC, refused to ratify the Rome Treaty, along with about 12 other states, and most of them in the developing world or thereabouts. So it's not fair. It's not
Absolutely.
fair. And there's a danger to that unfairness.
I do agree with you.
The Africans will leave, and they have already started leaving the system, and they have every right to do so.
Absolutely.
International law is not based on compulsion.
Absolutely. Let me come to Afam in Lagos. Afam, I mean, in the law of equity, you say he who must come to equity must come with clean hands, one of the principles. If you look at what is going on in the world, I mean, take a look at what is happening in Syria, how Bashar al-Assad has killed those people, and how Russia has used its veto power to stop the Security Council and ICC from investigating and prosecuting Assad. And here down in Libya, within a twinkle of an eye, we saw what the West did to the former leader of Libya. It just a twinkle of an eye how it was taken out. Is ICC and the Security Council, are they fair? Are they still fit for purpose at all? If these are just power play between the rich and the poor, the mighty, the lowly in the world. Afam.
Well, international politics is self-serving, selfish. People go for their self-interest. It's not about truth and fairness. So America will veto a position that does not suit them. The Russians will do the same. And the Chinese will use their veto power to protect their economic and socio-political interests. As when one of the major problems of the United Nations, especially the Security Council, where a few individuals could have their way or frustrate proper General Council resolutions or Security Council resolution from being passed to address certain pressing issues in the world. And that is why Syria has remained the unresolved mess during 4 years. And the point has to be made that there's a lot of hypocrisy involved. And I agree with Benga, the Americans have refused to submit to the ICC. And a number of atrocities that took place at the Guantanamo Bay needed to have been investigated and brought to justice. But the Americans would neither cooperate with the ICC or submit any of its nationals for investigation by the ICC. And unfortunately, these individuals are also not facing trial in their home country.
So Afam, so the question, Afam, so
the ICC is all about if the national court was.
So Afam, now the question is, so what is so special and spectacular about Africa? What is so special about Africa? So if America will not submit and subject itself to international politics and the rules and powers, even though they are not signatory to the Rome Statute of the ICC, why must Africa and African leaders continually be the subject and focus of harassment, intimidation, embarrassment, detention,
and of course, a number of African countries have harassed me.
Go on. Go on, sir.
Well, we have to admit that many African countries are weak and are tied to the apron strings of the Western powers. So even where the Western powers would... Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go on. Go on. We can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go on. Yeah, Afam, I can hear you. I can hear you. Go on.
So we have to admit the sad fact that many African countries and governments are weak. Many African governments and countries are weak. So even where some Western countries, they are tied to the apron strings of Western nations. So even where these Western nations would not ratify these treaties, the African countries are more or less cajoled into signing them and also cooperating with the ICC. Even countries that have not signed it will put pressure on African countries to hand over their nationals to stand trial at the ICC. So it underscores the hypocrisy of international politics. But I also dare say that a number of these atrocities, especially against the nationals of their own countries, take place very much in Africa. This is not suggesting it doesn't happen in any other part of the world. I mean, we could talk about what the Russians have done in Ukraine, what the Americans and the Russians have been in Syria, and what happened in Libya, and quite a number of places. And these are places of interest. But these Western powers, because they have veto powers, may never be compelled to appear to hand over their nationals for trial before the ICC. So it underscores the hypocrisy and the self-serving politics that you see on the international scene.
All right, Benga, thank you so much for that contribution. As we come down to the program, we can look at what happened just a couple of days ago when we had this Myanmar coup. It came up at the Security Council, and then we see China, Russia vetoing the decision. the proposal of the Security Council to send a very stern warning to the coup plot, to the those who have taken over power in Myanmar. So if Russia and China will continue to protect even coup plotters in Myanmar, and then they can speak up against coup plotters in Africa, where is the balance of power? Where is the integrity of international politics? Just to condemn people who have plotted coup, who have carried out coup in Myanmar, you're giving them protection. You're vetoing the decision of the Security Council. Benga.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Again, these are the shortcomings of the international legal order. We thought until very recently, until this happened, that we now have a right to democratic governance in international relations. And that right has been protected by so many treaties, from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. All these international treaties give countries, the populations in countries, that right to participation in their government and the right to choose and appoint and vote. So we thought we were there. And there have been many cases, especially before international courts, that back up this right, this so-called right, in quotes. But we are not yet where we should be. We are still in a world dominated by power. As I said much earlier on, legitimacy now should not flow from the barrel of the gun. It should flow from the will of the people. But unfortunately, in Myanmar, in Turkey, recently we saw there was an attempt in coup d'etat there. Particularly for us in Africa, we have a lot to gain in seeing an end to an era of recognition of military regimes. Because we faced, I think, the most damaging periods of our existence in the 80s, in the 70s, for some of us in the 60s as well, with military regimes. We cannot afford for the idea to continue. It should be an option that is never there again. But with this kind of threats we are seeing in Burma, which is now called Myanmar, and Turkey, and I think 1 or 2 instances in Africa, the danger is still very much there.
Danger still very
fight against it.
All right, thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for your time. Afam, quickly, last word from you. What is the way forward for Africa? What should Africa be doing? Understanding the fact that international politics is not in favor of Africa, nor African leaders. It is just about interest. Afam, what should African leaders be doing now? Because this is about interest. Afam. Hello, Afam, can you hear me? Hello, Afam Osigwe, can you hear me? Oh, I'm afraid he can't hear me. All right. If Afam, if you can hear me well, and
I wish I could give you a positive answer. But what can African leaders do when they are greatly indebted to the Chinese? Pardon?
Go on.
Yeah, I'm saying. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes,
I can.
I can hear you. I can hear you. Can I go on?
Yes, go on.
I say, how much do you expect African countries to do? How much do you expect African countries to do when they keep borrowing and they're over-leveraged and they keep signing all manner of terms and contracts that limit their sovereignty and their ability to do things? And sometimes when you're indebted to the world powers, they sometimes also determine how you vote or stand with on certain issues.
All right.
A borrower, a poorly developed country that is tied to apron strings of people that import things can hardly be expected to do much in international politics.
Thank you so much.
End up being a pawn.
Thank you.
The chessboard being moved about by the international powers depending on how they.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Afam Osigwe, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, joining us live from Lagos. Thank you so much for your thoughts on the program today. And Dr. Benga Odoto, you have always remained a friend. Thank you so much for your contribution live from Kent, Deputy Director of School of Law, and of course, Associate Professor International Commercial Law in Kent. Thank you for joining us, guys. We are very grateful for your thoughts on the program. My sincere appreciation to my team on the show today. Enjoy your weekend. And guys, we got stay safe in London or in Kent. Variant is very dangerous. All right, see you guys again.
We're in a serious lockdown. I've not stepped out of the house.
All right, I need to go now. Thank you guys for your time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye.